While this is going on, Richard is at Acre, and he gets word of Saladin's attack. What he'd been doing at Acre was planning an attack on Beirut. So before leaving, his idea was that he was going to continue to mop up the coastal fortresses. But he immediately gathers a small force and sets sail for Jaffa. Ernoul gives us this rather dramatic description of this. He tells us that when Richard's ships approach Jaffa and Richard sees Saladin's banners flying over the walls, he grabs a Danish axe and calls out, "By God's calves, they will not capture the Christians." On August 1st, Richard and a few dozen knights, a few hundred infantry, and a force of Italian crossbowmen storm the shores of Jaffa. Richard and his men quickly penetrate into Jaffa itself and battle through the streets, cutting down Saladin's men. Richard manages to clear Jaffa of Muslim troops and regains control of the city. So, Rand, what do you think of this amphibious assault on Jaffa and Richard's unlikely quick recapture of the city here?
For me, it's definitely one of the most dramatic episodes in the entire Third Crusade, and also one of the most important. Not only just from a sense of what it accomplished for the Third Crusade, but also just the demonstration of Richard's military capability. When you read the descriptions of this action in the primary sources, the things they're describing Richard doing with this amphibious assault on the city, you can almost transcribe it into current day amphibious warfare doctrine. I mean, this action right here really demonstrates just how almost ahead of his time Richard was militarily, because you really don't see an amphibious landing, a forced amphibious landing like this in pre-modern warfare as a whole. Usually amphibious landings were conducted, it was really just transports coming to shore and troops disembarking and whatnot. Almost never do you see a forced amphibious landing like this, under fire and immediately engaging in combat on a beachhead. The other thing that's really interesting to point out is that the reason why Richard brought so many crossbowmen with him is that I believe it's in the Gesta Regis Ricardi, but they actually describe the crossbowmen providing covering fire from the boats as the troops were landing, where you get this whole notion of combined arms attacks are not something that the modern world invented. It was uncommon, but you're seeing an operation that if we were to change the names of the equipment, could easily have been an after-action report for an amphibious landing today. We still utilize the same tactics, supporting fire from supporting maritime fire and things like that. So it really does just it's to me, it's my favorite episode of the Third Crusade, because it demonstrates Richard's military acumen far better than any of the other engagements he was in my opinion, and also shows really in a way kind of how ahead of his time he was and how creative he could be tactically and strategically. I would say the only other thing I would add is that this is also a perfect demonstration of why the coastal cities were so important to the Crusader kingdom, because by having a string of coastal cities like this with the maritime support that was incumbent in them, they could provide this kind of rapid response, or what we would call today QRF, quick reaction force, to another city that was under threat. And notice, how quickly Richard is able to respond to this.
Yeah, good comments. And Dr. Schroeder, I know not last time, but when we did the Cyprus podcast,
yes,
there was kind of a preview of this.
I was just going to say, actually, Richard has done this before. The difference being that, of course, the troops of Isaac Ximena were mercenaries and not very loyal to him, and he really ultimately didn't face that great a resistance. His advantage here, it's really not an advantage, because I think we should stop back and think about it. The accounts, Baha ad-Din talks about 300 men with Richard, as possibly as many as 1,000. And at most 17 mounted men later, when we get to August 5th, as I'm sure we will. But I understood he only went with his household knights of about 50 men. So this is an extremely tiny force. So although I agree with everything Dr. Or Rand said about this being a brilliant, combined operation in theory of it being an amphibious force coming in with covering fire, I think that doesn't give enough credit to the fact this was very, very tiny force against a massive army, and it should have been disastrous. No matter how good the idea of covering fire from your crossbowmen, if you've only got maybe 500 to 1,000 of them against an army that's allegedly 20,000 strong, that should have been nothing. And the only two things, obviously, part of it, Richard obviously has this incredible charisma, and his men follow him and they jump into the water with him. And again, very dramatic descriptions of him. He jumps overboard. He's, the water's still up to his groin. He's carrying a crossbow in one hand and the axe in the other. He fires the crossbow as he comes ashore. So he's demonstrating, he has before, he's familiar with these weapons that are normally handled by common soldiers and not knights. And he doesn't bother with the shield. I mean, he goes ashore with fighting two-handed. Amazing, imagery here. But I think we have to think, why on earth was he successful? And I think we're back to the fact this was an army that thought they had already won. Saladin's troops must have been so sated from sacking the city, and some of them were still in the city sacking, that they really weren't prepared. Because if you read the accounts, he does arrive in time. They see him coming. They have time to stream down to the beach. But they couldn't have been truly fighting fit, or I don't see how, with, a maximum of 1,000 men, he penetrates to the city, crosses that beach.
I think Dr. Schrader. I think Dr. Schrader. I think the best answer I think that we can get from the sources is that this was a maneuver that completely took Saladin and his army by surprise.
They just didn't expect them to come.
I don't think they ever would have thought, that he could have brought a force to the city's aid that quickly. And you're right. I think they were. There were probably some large elements of the army still inside the city, still preoccupied with looting and sacking. And as we've seen before in Saladin's career, that's one of the big reasons he lost at Montgazard was, his elements were all out, separated, all and little raiding parties.
Yeah. Plus that, as we already discussed, there were some issues in Saladin's army in terms of the cohesiveness of the various contingents and rivalries springing up and that sort of thing. But yeah, I have to agree with both of you. I mean, every time all the times I've read about this battle and read all the different accounts, and it's just amazing that this turned out to be a victory for Richard. I mean, it does seem like it should have just been so easily defeated. And, not only do they successfully land, but they actually get into Jaffa and then fight their way through Jaffa and clear it of the occupying troops. It really is an amazing... And yeah, I do think, Dr. Schrader, I have to agree with you. I mean, Richard was just a very unique person. I mean, he was a really outstanding commander who seemed to inspire something almost superhuman in his troops. It's pretty remarkable. Dr. Donachie, did you want to comment on this episode?
Yeah, Richard sets out from Acre, and a main army goes down the coast towards Caesarea, where it gets held up by ambushes and skirmishes and attacks by the rest of Saladin's army. That's under Henry of Champagne, Balin of Ebelin, Hugh and William Tiberius, and that has the Templars and the Hospitallers in it. That's the main core army of the Crusaders coming down the coast. And I think Saladin is genuinely surprised, as has been mentioned. I think he's genuinely surprised because he wouldn't expect the main army to come down the coast as it did. But it had taken, in the run-up to Arsuf, which is a comparable distance, Acre to Arsuf, Acre to Jaffa, had taken 17 days to do so. And I think Saladin is expecting a similar kind of time scale thereabouts to for an army to make it, for that relief army to make it down to Jaffa. And I think he thinks he's got the time to deal with the citadel, to have negotiated surrender, to deal with it. And he almost does. The citadel is almost falling through negotiation at the time that Richard turns up. So I think he's surprised by this. And as such, his army is more dispersed in and around the area. about Jaffa and up towards Caesarea. And what he's actually got is Richard comes ashore and he doesn't have to fight the entirety of Saladin's army to get to Jaffa. He's got to fight those elements that are closest to it. So I think the number of troops that get, the numbers that are bandied around for the number of troops that Saladin had in Jaffa was about 3,000. Those who are keeping an eye on the citadel, those who are still wandering around, sacking and plundering and everything else, the Mamluk guards, etc. So Richard's got to come ashore and is forced a landing amphibious, which is he's done before. He did it on Cyprus, and this is a greater challenge in this regard. So he's got some experience, and Richard does it and he succeeds. But he manages to fight his way through these smaller elements and flush them out of the city, so that Saladin is completely caught by surprise by this. So when he turns around, his army isn't all there and all ready to go to repulse Richard and counterattack and drive him back into the sea. He's caught on the surprise by this because he's expecting this main army to come from the north, and he thinks he's got the time to deal with Jaffa before turning northwards.
Thanks for watching. This channel posts a new video or podcast every Monday. My historical novel, Why Does the Heathen Rage?, is available now on Amazon. Click on the link in the info box below the video to get your copy. Also, check out the Real Crusades History blog at realcrusadeshistory.com, where Dr. Helena Schroeder posts a weekly article on Crusades history.